Hello there, and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb. Today, I'm joined by our regular hosts, Doctors Rod Rosenblatt, Scott Keith, and Adam Francisco. Today, we are back into sort of doing topical episodes. Just last month and 2 weeks in May, I believe, we started doing the history of Christianity in America with Dr. Dan Van Voris, which was, I think it was a lot of fun. It was a topic I knew next to nothing about. I knew, basically the rough outline that Dan had provided, but I think it ended up being a great series. So if you haven't listened to that yet, you should go back and do so. It starts with the colonies, and then it moves through, and it's 6 episodes. It's pretty easy listening. I think each episode was nearly 40 minutes exactly, too, so they were really consistent.
Dan's a pro.
Yeah, he said he has an internal timer that, shuts off at 40 minutes, which is from lecturing, because then you're open for questions.
I say that all the time when I go out on speaking gigs. They're like, can you talk for 3 hours? And I said, I can talk 3 times for 50 minutes.
3 times?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but before we jump into today's episode, which is we're going to have a conversation about Stoicism, and Adam's going to lead us through that, because where did you go, Adam? You went to Florida, and you recently gave a series of lectures on it?
Well, I just did one lecture on Stoicism, only because it was lectures to a group of chaplains for the military. And especially in military veteran culture, gym culture, and male culture, if you will, there has been a resurgence of Stoicism. So
we're going to jump into that. But before we do, I'd like to remind everybody, I think I said on the last episode that there was only a handful of tickets left to the Here We Still Stand conference, and that remains true. There are even fewer tickets left. Here We Still Stand 2019 is in San Diego, California. You can go to the website herewestillstand.org to find out all of the details. You can get, I believe it's $25 off your registration price if you use the code from the Thinking Fellows. The code is PNET19. I'll put it in parentheses on the show notes too, so you can use it at checkout. The other thing that we have going on right now is Donovan Riley is publishing a book at the 1517 Publishing House called Crucifying Religion. It's available for pre-order right now. You can get it at shop.1517.org for pre-order, and when the Amazon link is up too.
It's up.
Oh, it is up.
Yeah.
There you go. Thanks, Adam. I will put that in the show notes as well, so you can pre-order it from wherever you prefer. All right, guys. So Stoicism, for people who may not have studied philosophy in a classroom, can we define it?
We can, but maybe let's start, why are we even looking at this topic? Because it is an ancient philosophy. It appears around the time of Alexander the Great. Let's just say 300 BC. You hear about it just in passing in the pages of the New Testament when Paul goes to Athens in Acts 17, the last third of that chapter. You hear that he's not accosted, but he's brought before a Stoic, and probably you could put in parentheses Epicurean philosophers. They were both there, but the Stoics he was primarily talking to them. But then it doesn't die out, but you don't hear a whole lot about Stoicism. You've got some Roman emperors, Marcus Aurelius. You got some famous figures, Cicero. But through the Middle Ages, early modern period, up into the 20th century, don't hear much about it. Then all of a sudden, in the last 20 years, maybe less than that, maybe 10 years, now you can get a Stoic devotional. You can, if you're
There's
a social media person, Instagram, you can get your daily Stoic, et cetera, and then you've got some personalities out there like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and others, Jocko Willink, who I don't think that they'd call themselves Stoics, but they certainly, much of their philosophy or worldview is Stoic. Well, I think he'd describe himself as Stoic in a sort of adjectival way, that he approaches things in a Stoic fashion, but that he's part of a school of Stoicism, probably not. But,
Yeah.
But, so there's Jordan Peterson, that name, that guy's got a huge following.
Yeah, he really does.
So that's why I did the lectures down in Florida or that lecture on it, because it does influence a lot of those sorts of cultures. And
Well, there's even
One-
a lot of, if you go look, there's articles online about the way, like presidents reflecting on Stoic literature and things like that. Anybody in positions of power, it seems to be one of those things, materials that is suggested for them to reflect on.
Well,
Yeah,
not,
one
I
of
don't think
the-
not all of them, but I've like the guy who does the Art of Manliness podcast. I always forget his name, but he loves Teddy Roosevelt, and I don't necessarily think Teddy Roosevelt would have described himself as a Stoic. Maybe he would have, but in that podcast, Brett McKay, that's his name. Brett McKay does draw a connection. Brett himself is, I think, a Stoic, and draws connections between sort of Teddy Roosevelt's sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, overcome, continually make yourself better day by day type of stuff. He does associate that, but I don't think every president for sure could be linked to Stoicism.
No, there was like a list of, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know how accurate it is. I found a list in a newspaper that was like Bill Clinton, George W.
Bill
Bush.
Clinton,
And so,
I'd expect more. He'd be more of an Epicurean.
hedonist, yeah.
But General Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense,
Right.
famously carried around a copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations in his
Meditations.
pocket. So, why my real interest, and Scott, I think it's true of you, in this is we're trying to discern if there's a bridge between Stoicism and Christianity. Neil Robinson in the Teaching Company and his, I think it's like 12 lecture long series on the history of Western philosophy, has one complete lecture dedicated to that question. Is there a bridge from Stoicism to Christianity? He bases that in part upon Paul's attempt to make a defense of the gospel before a Stoic
Right.
audience at Athens. So,
Yeah.
I mentioned a bit ago that it's ancient philosophy emerges after the Greek world that was comprised of all sorts of independent, autonomous city-states starts to fall apart, and Alexander the Great and a cosmopolis or an empire, a Greek-speaking empire, is born. And those old philosophies of Plato and Aristotle and especially their political and ethical philosophy about what it means to be a good citizen in a polis, is no longer really a relevant question or a question people are asking. So in the wake of Aristotle and Plato's political philosophy, and as they start to decline, you see the rise of new philosophies, and one of those would be the philosophy put forward by a man named Zeno, who would meet with his students in Athens in the marketplace in the shade of a porch, a stoa. And so sometimes Stoicism is called the porch philosophy. They couldn't afford, and they probably would have not really been too keen to purchase a building
Right.
like Plato had his academy, Aristotle had his lyceum. They just meet outdoors.
That would go
And-
against moderation.
yeah. Stoicism is very much a minimalist,
Yeah.
kind of Spartan-like philosophy. It's one of its. It has lots of refrains. One of them is living a life in accordance with nature. That is, you just wherever you are, there you are, and you make do with where your current circumstances. You don't gripe about them. You don't get overjoyed about them. You just sort of
Right.
move forward.
That's why we
Onward and upward.
sort of in
so
the
to speak.
vernacular will say if somebody sort of is very moderate in their emotional reactions to something, they don't laugh a lot, they don't cry a lot, they sort of just seem to take life as it comes. We will say, oh, he's a very stoic person.
Yes, we use it as an adjective.
And what is meant by that is sort of that we don't really know why, but there's something about them that allows them to just not react wildly to whatever situation. So sometimes it might seem like they're not very happy, but it probably also doesn't seem like they're sad all the time either. They're just sort of who they are.
Yeah, it's very deterministic. Classic Stoicism, certainly, and certain modern Stoicism as well. By that I mean, whatever your circumstances are, that's
Predetermined.
been determined. You don't fight against them. It's sort of there's an Eastern analog or parallel in Taoism. Just find yourself in the midst of it and just carry forward in life. Stoicism emphasizes not necessarily particular ethics, but being a virtuous person.
Yeah.
So with the rise of virtue ethics and so on, a lot of that is drawn or draws upon Cicero and the other Stoics. Another reason why am interested in it, because I'm very much drawn to Stoic philosophy. Like if I had to choose, I was forced to choose between, let's say, Stoicism and Epicureanism, I'd go Stoicism.
Oh, I think I definitely, I'm very much drawn to Stoicism, even though I criticize people for being sort of Stoic Christians or Christian Stoics, however you want to say that. I'm very much drawn to it. I think one of the things that draws me to it is if you think of how, this is going to probably get me in trouble, but
You're good at that.
I'm getting used to it. So, if you kind of think of how men used to be, as opposed to how they're portrayed now, I'll at least say that. And so I'll sometimes do this in terms of my grandfather and the modern day man as I see him and or encounter him or see him portrayed. My grandfather was very stoic, but if you would have asked him to explain Stoic philosophy to you, he certainly could not do it. He was an airplane mechanic.
Sure.
But I never really saw him get overly sad or overly happy or overly angry. If his car broke down, he didn't like start throwing things in the garage. He'd go put the car in the garage, put it up on jacks, open the hood, and figure out what's wrong with it. Very manly in that sense, and also very stoic in that sense. I've heard it explained too, like within sort of the military parameters, that this is sort of what was expected of a military man in the past, right? That you didn't really get too worked up about stuff. You went and did what was required of you, without a lot of opinions, without a lot of emotions attached to it, and that there's a difficulty transitioning that into the modern day sort of context where every man is expected to have a personal story about every event that
very difficult that transition.
that he encounters. I'll sometimes tell your mom, like, and this is maybe right or wrong because I'm not saying he was the best man that ever lived by any means, but I will sometimes gauge whether or not I should do this or that by asking myself, would my grandfather have done that? And sometimes I'll say no, he wouldn't have done that, and that means I should, because he wasn't very interactive with his kids. That was part of how stoic he was, right? He was not very interactive with his own kids, and so sometimes my answer is no, I should do the opposite. But sometimes it's I should try to figure out how to do that on my truck rather than take it in or something like that. I don't know if that.
Yeah. Well, jumping back just a bit, you talk about military culture. One of the things you learn, or at least used to learn, I don't know about today, is to learn how to suffer in silence.
Yes.
And to take all your emotions, your feelings.
I think you used to learn that as a man
grief.
too.
Well, but no kidding. I've heard it taught this way. I've been told since then, this isn't the greatest advice in terms of psychology, but take all that stuff you have, these emotions, and just bury them way down deep. Tuck them up in a little box, and as if that's a healthy thing.
Yes.
But that's sort of what you learn.
Well, you can even
stoic.
sort of think of the difference today between sort of being hyper aware of every time you have an ache or a pain, and you've seen on TV that, there's even ads by famous people on TV telling you that if you have anything going wrong with you physically or emotionally, period, the end, you rush into the doctor, tell them exactly what's going on. Whereas in the past, some of the suffer in silence was like, well, I have a headache, but I still have to go to work today. And the whole freaking, in my grandfather's case, SR-71 assembly plant doesn't need to know about my headache. Pop a couple of aspirin or not and go in and do what you need to do. Now, downside of that is that the guys who lived by that philosophy typically died a lot earlier because they didn't go to the doctor. The upside of that is they weren't walking around complaining on the whole all the time either. So
I think one of the things that maybe draws people to it, and Adam, you could correct me too, is that it provides sort of a mold for people who have told there is no mold in life. It's just like you do you culture. There are no rules, and that has left a lot of people wanting some structure. And this seems to be at least pretty simple and clear cut, because the responsibility falls on you and not the people who do things to you. That your government, your city, your wife, your kids. It's about you to react appropriately to those.
There's an assumption of order.
Right.
In Stoicism, that there's a order, there's a moral order, there's an
assumption is, at least in some of the more sort of philosophical versions, that the gods exist and that they love you, and that has ramifications for your actions in the world.
Yeah, and then you can even get some who will talk about the gods in plural, but then talk about the one behind all the
Yeah.
gods.
Really?
And
Yep.
so there's this order, and the Stoic is to discern what that order is. In a world filled with disorder and change and so on, the Stoic is always looking for that thing that doesn't change, to figure out how to live a life in accordance with the natural order to things. So there's a lot of, in Stoicism, a strong emphasis on what we'd call natural law.
Yeah.
As thinking, one of the big issues with Stoicism is when a person thinks that they can pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, not just to become stronger or
More virtuous.
or learn how to fix a new type of car or whatever, but when all of a sudden that making yourself a better person is turned vertically
To more prosperity.
and then ultimately, like, I'm going to live a
salvation.
life in pleasing with
Yeah.
the gods or God or the universe or whatever it might be. That's where, because people tend to
That's where it goes
confuse the
south.
horizontal from the vertical.
Well, it makes a lot of sense that Paul was trying to make contact with them on Mars Hill.
Oh, I think so too. And I'd say wisely, I like your question, that are modern day young men drawn to this because it provides some order in a world that says it's all disorder, right? Or some truth in a world that says there's no truth. It does, but one of the beauties of Stoicism is that the answers aren't many and they're not long. So you're not getting this like wildly drawn out ethical system here. You're getting a very small set of virtues to try to live by. A very, very small set of virtues to try to, 3 or 4, to try to live by.
So it's still pretty pluralistic for people who are used to that as well.
Well, it's not telling you necessarily that, like, if you're sleeping around, you're going to hell, right? It's saying, though, you need to try to be a moral person. But the figuring out what that means is kind of left to you.
Yep. Yeah. You and your ability to discern.
Yeah.
So it does. While it seems objective, there is quite a bit of subjectivism.
Well, that's the
to it
thing
as
with
well.
virtue ethics, right? Is that it tries to make an objective out of just don't be a jerk, which is a subjective sort of approach.
Is it not like in part also a shortcoming of natural law, because there are things in flux in nature as well? So like you might be able to get something like not murdering out of some examples in nature, but say like respecting women as equals who by nature are less powerful than you, things like that. Like, is there not something lacking there, some other revelation? Or
We just can't go too deep with natural law. I mean, one of the limitations of natural law is, again, it's just not that
So
specific, right?
Yeah.
If you have a God who that you can actually, we've done this apologetically through some other method of evidential examination and verification. You can say that this is God, and that you can actually then verify what God's words were, and that God explains to you with words right and wrong, among other things, right? Salvation, all that kind of thing. That is, you're inevitably going to get much more detail from that, what we call direct revelation, than you are by trying to examine any natural revelation, even natural law. So you might get from natural law, again, kind of like Stoicism, a small set of rights and wrongs or virtues, right? Don't murder.
but not exhaustive.
Don't steal. But the why on all of that is still going to kind of be left to your interpretation, right?
Yeah.
Don't steal because God said not to. Don't steal because it's just wrong for the universe. Don't steal because you don't want people to steal from you. All of that is still yet to be worked out with natural law.
It also has a, if you will, not a high anthropology, but it certainly doesn't have a low anthropology.
That's right.
It assumes that we can all get better. Now, yeah, sure, we could all, if we eat enough protein and lift enough
Right.
weights, get a little
Personally
stronger,
improve.
perhaps. But
Yeah.
in terms
Until
of
we're too old to do that.
Yeah, until our ethics, or concerning our ethics and
Yeah.
our righteousness before God, Stoicism doesn't make those distinctions between, let's say, like an active and a passive righteousness
Right.
or anything like that. So, in terms of defining righteousness, like you said a bit ago, Stoicism is a very slim philosophy. If you read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, it's just filled with aphorisms.
Right.
And is that why it's so popular? That seems to be the popular sort of ancient work that people read from Stoicism.
Because it's short.
Yeah.
Well, because
I
it's
think so.
aphorisms.
And it is.
it's
There is
aphorism.
some wisdom. It's wisdom that goes against our culture. So I
current
think
culture.
that's the big draw is.
Well, same thing with Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. I mean, the explanations are
Well, let's talk about this guy because this
certainly
is the guy
long,
we need to.
but the rules themselves are kind of aphorisms. You know, clean your room.
Yeah.
You know, okay, that's great advice.
Sure.
You know, what are we to draw from that advice? Now, he goes on to explain that, which is why this is probably going too deep for this show, why our friend Dan Dean says he's more of a Hegelian than a Stoic, because he's sort of trying to map out a whole theme for the universe. But I think the themes in it are very Stoic in Jordan Peterson.
Well, yeah, like something like clean your room is explained like, basically addressing a lot of people's ambition and saying, how can you be ambitious to succeed at anything in the world and not start with ordering your own life?
Yeah, he's doing a great job with that, to be honest with you. I mean, I've got some great criticisms of him, but what he's pointing out is that in our culture, it's very popular to look outside and see gloom and doom, right? That everything's falling apart, and to sort of kind of point your finger out there while your room is a mess.
Yeah.
Right. You can't even wake up in the morning and make your bed, and you're able to point out all these things that are wrong with the world. And I love the line. He says, "Yeah, things are bad, probably worse than you think." That's great because he's not a Christian, but if you were a Christian, that's a pretty good explanation of total depravity.
Yeah, they're worse than you think.
Yeah, things are bad. They're worse than you think they are. It says, but don't start by making a list of everything that's bad outside of your room. Go make your bed. Go clean your room.
Now, because it's so personally oriented, based on like how you would deal with the circumstance, is there a risk that somebody does see something, say, wrong and will not take any action because of it publicly? So, like give a like a political example or something like that where, well, I can deal with the effects of, I don't know, abortion or something like that, but I shouldn't speak out against it because it doesn't affect me unless I just personally change my life about it. Is there a risk there?
I don't think that would be
sort of
considered virtuous. I mean, especially for somebody like Cicero. Cicero's whole MO is your public morality and how you sort of deal with yourself and others publicly. So I don't know. Adam, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that for like an actual Stoic that would be considered virtuous at all.
Yeah, I think you're right. You mentioned Cicero, and I know that with Melanchthon quotes Cicero more than any other
he
Greek
loves
or
Cicero.
Roman. Right?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Because that's true for other like late medieval authors, where Aristotle is, of course, the philosopher.
Sure.
But Cicero is right alongside of him or underneath him. And
I think for Melanchthon, Cicero's the link between sort of ancient philosophy and ability to express yourself well, and the importance of expressing yourself well.
so it's rhetoric.
Yeah, so it's rhetoric. It's the rhetoric component. I think that's why Cicero is his favorite.
I think Melanchthon calls him like the greatest like speaker to ever.
Ever live.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Stoicism, I don't know. I know that I believe at least all of the humanists in general were concerned with the public morality of their time. And Melanchthon's no exception there. I mean, he's really not an exception there. It's really, in my belief, the end reason why most of sort of the initial ethical teachings within systematized Lutheranism come from Melanchthon. Because he's still very concerned with that, even as the Reformation progresses. Even as the doctrine of salvation by grace alone, through faith alone progresses.
So Adam,
he's still
the
very
big
concerned with
question, which we teased at the beginning, was the compatibility of this with, I guess, Christianity in a whole. My mind's sort of drawn towards, Luther's Heidelberg Disputation, because the whole thing is sort of built upon the order in which you place these sort of things. Not saying that philosophy is totally wicked for the Christian, but then when philosophy supersedes theology or becomes your basis for life, and then you interpret theological doctrine through that philosophy, is when you get glory and problems start to arise. But besides that kind of like maybe it's superseding your Christianity? Is there a compatibility issue?
Yeah, I think it's just fine to approach things like a Stoic, your day-to-day life. Roll up your sleeves and just get to work.
Yeah.
Make your bed.
Yeah.
You change diapers.
Try to be virtuous.
And so on and so forth. But to be a Christian and a Stoic, I think they're incompatible. Because ultimately, Stoicism, it's not like Buddhism or Hinduism, but the more virtuous you become, the more one with nature, the more you...
in line with the will of the gods.
Yeah, and the will of the gods, the will of nature, the more you embrace the suck is a military saying, Stoic saying, I guess. Not only the better person you become, but the more right you'll be in the before the universe, so to speak. And it tends to, not just tends to, it really undermines, or it will cause one to lose focus on what the real problem is. The problem isn't just that there's a little disorder here and there. There's something deep down wrong with just human beings. And all of creation. Creation groans because it's so affected by the fall. And so Stoicism maybe teaches people that they could live well in a relative way, but goes a little further and suggests that you can actually make the world right.
Yeah.
And that's a false bill of goods.
Jordan Peterson does that too.
Yeah.
You try and make the world right by starting with making your bed, cleaning your room, that type of thing. Start with the small.
Yeah.
Move to
When it's local, it's fine. But when all of a sudden it becomes Stoicism becomes like a system, a metaphysic or something like that, then that's where it becomes problematic and contradicts Christianity.
Well, and it's a total law.
That's the big. To me, that's the big. Adam pointed out the first big one, which is it does have a low anthropology or a high anthropology, right? As opposed to Christianity, which has a low anthropology. In other words, your ability as a human being to save yourself, let alone save anybody else before a holy God, is zippo, according to the scriptures. And according to Stoicism, well, you might actually be able to make some inroads on that if you roll up your sleeves and get the work done. The second part of that, and it's what I've in a couple blogs have criticized Jordan Peterson for, is that there's no category for grace, mercy, or forgiveness really here. And that's one of the biggest incompatibilities. So not only does Christianity have a low anthropology, it's got a high view of God in Christ and a completely one-sided view of how one is saved before that holy God on account of Christ. And that's by God having a gracious attitude or disposition toward the sinner because of the person and work of the only good man that was ever born, Jesus Christ. And then
it gets very specific.
Right. Because of his death and resurrection for you. Now there's no category for that within Stoicism. There's no way to really blend that into if you're talking about anything more than just how to, like Adam said, how to live your civil life, right? If you're talking anything more about that than that, there's no category there for the greater than the how am I saved before a holy God? Why do I have such guilt? Where does this guilt come from? How can I be relieved of this guilt?
Well, yeah, and Stoicism sort of as a comfort. You see that in sort of those like you said, those motivational Instagram posts and things like that, right? Where that your success in getting up and changing your life, you'll see people who start waking up at 4:30 in the morning and go to the gym for an hour every day, and that success is now their total comfort in life. It's that thing that staves off sort of all woe in this world. Where from a Christian perspective, we're saying that's surface level. That's actually not getting to the heart of the real problem of why you had woe in the first place.
Yeah.
Well,
there's no room for almost teaches against any sort of contrition.
And that's right.
And repentance.
Yeah. And thus forgiveness.
Yeah, so it's basically just do better.
Yeah,
it's not. There's no recognition. There's no reflection about how inward focused you are.
Just move forward.
Bent on yourself, everybody is.
And if it sort of feeds into that a little bit, doesn't it?
Well, and let's be real. If it's a theology, it's a complete theology of glory, as opposed to a theology of the cross. I mean,
Yeah.
period.
That's where. Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Yeah. So Jordan Peterson, in his latest podcast, just did an interview with the Roman Catholic Bishop Barron. I think it's John Barron. I'm not sure the first name. And in that interview, Jordan Peterson says where Christianity has gone wrong, alluding to since the Reformation, has been its focus on grace. Instead of on
Peterson said that?
Yeah, instead of encouraging people to make their lives better
Because
through God.
Very interesting.
What the funny thing is, I was talking to Dan Price about this today, and Dan's like, well, because Dan loves Jordan Peterson, he's like, since I know from being sort of a fanboy of Jordan Peterson that he's said about 1,000 times that he hasn't been down the door of a church in over 25 years, he possibly doesn't know that the real problem with modern day Christianity is that it's completely focused on teaching people to make their life better through Jesus, in the here and now, better through Jesus, and not focused at all on grace on account of Christ.
Yep.
Interesting.
That's a fair generalization.
Yeah. But, and I think even the Roman Catholic, even Bishop Barron, went to sort of the objective work for Christ on the cross for the sinner that the sinner could not accomplish for himself, which is, well, good on you, because that's, in modern day Roman Catholicism, that's probably a difficult thing to do. But still, I mean, that's sort of the Stoicism coming through, right? If you're going to have a God like Jesus, that God ought to actually be helpful to you here in your day-to-day life.
Enforcing good order.
Yeah. More so than just helpful in saving you for this thing that may or may not be, which we call the new creation, right? The new heaven and the new earth, the life of the world to come. And
that will sell in our culture like crazy.
That'll sell in our churches like crazy.
Yeah. Oftentimes, Jordan Peterson gets passed off as being a Christian.
Right.
He knows better, and he says better.
Yeah, he's worked. He's got a whole series of lectures on the Old Testament on YouTube, I think it is, and he knows
Dealt
the
with his
language of
mythos.
Christianity. But through like sort of Jungian type of lens. But
totally
when asked,
Jungian lens.
Yeah, when asked, are you a Christian? Do you believe Jesus rose from the dead? He'd say no.
No.
So it's that he can use some of the rhetoric of Christianity and makes Christianity seem like a kind of a useful or a philosophy that is commensurate with.
Well, he literally
modern.
It's very Jungian because in 12 Rules he usually literally calls it a useful universal mythos. So you have these mythical, but not meant in the way that we kind of understand mythical today, like a Disney movie, but more like a universal theme that occurs.
Communal
story, and that there are communal themes and stories here within the Christian. Honestly, the Jewish scriptures, right, the Hebrew scriptures, and the Christian New Testament that are useful. Of course, so then when he teaches the teachings of Jesus, they're being taught from a completely moral exemplar standpoint.
Yeah.
Right? They're not being taught from, as I, I've started calling him, not from the standpoint of the topsy-turvy God who actually takes everything that we would think is a moral example and turns it on its head. You take the Decalogue and you don't take Christ doubling down on the Decalogue and saying that you've actually committed adultery if you've looked at a woman in lust, you've actually killed somebody, if you've hated them in your heart. You take just the words. Well, of course it's good to not kill. And of course it's good not to cheat on your wife and all these things. These are virtues we should all attain to.
I've read some stuff from, I think it was the Gospel Coalition, or maybe it was somebody connected with Christianity Today, and they were talking about Jordan Peterson and his popularity within broader Christianity. And it's interesting, when he's critiqued by, let's say, the evangelical crowd, the critique is he's too hard on social justice and feminism and so on and so forth. It's not a theological critique, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So your critique of the real problem is his theology, or the fact that he does not get the gospel whatsoever. Nor should we maybe expect him to.
I don't
he's not a
expect him
Christian,
to, but he uses the categories, and I think it's confusing.
Yeah. So it's that he kind of puts forward a theology of glory, a theology of a religion of the law, if you will, but using Christian language, and it makes it very deceptive.
Yes.
Not suggesting he's
Yeah.
trying to be
Intending
deceiving,
that.
but
No, I'm not. I wouldn't say he is intending that, but it does.
Yeah.
Because I do think he believes wholeheartedly that this is a communal story that's very helpful for your life. I think he actually believes
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
So it's not deception, but to the sort of unknowing masses out there, Christian masses who are taking this in, it becomes a theology.
Well, I mean, how similar does it sound to a lot of preaching? When you go, I mean, I've listened to a lot.
well,
of
that's why he's so
events.
popular in Christian circles.
Yeah.
It's,
I mean,
it's
it sounds like
Yeah.
your next mega pastor, right? It's
Yeah.
self-improvement.
Well, ask yourself this anytime you hear a sermon, and ask yourself this if you're sort of connecting 12 rules to sort of any kind of theology for your life. Did Christ have to die for this to be said?
Right. There it is.
Could
if
Jordan Peterson have preached this sermon?
Yeah, if the answer to that is no,
Uh-huh.
you are probably getting some weird form of Stoicism rather than the gospel.
Uh-huh.
yeah. We should we say we really do like Jordan Peterson? Just
Oh, I
for,
do.
For the record.
I do.
in
Here's the
terms of a
thing: is that
public
this
intellectual.
is my world. Like the reason I like him is most of the lecturing I do is on being a man or being a father or being a friend or that type of thing. Most of the lecturing I did somewhat like 24 gigs last year, and I think 19 of them or so were on this type of thing. And so I'm really drawn to a man who is helping millions of other men to become better men. Like there's a lot of value there, and he ought to be commended for the work that he does, as probably should Jocko and whatever names I'm leaving off the list who are doing the same type of thing. But even if Adam said if he were not a Christian, he'd be a Stoic rather than an Epicurean, right?
If Christianity wasn't an option.
Yeah, right. That's the better way to say that. And I agree with him. But here's the thing. I think that I know many men who would try to be a Stoic and would utterly fail.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest with you, it's going to sound a little arrogant. I don't necessarily think I'd be one of them. I can be a very disciplined person when I need to be, except when it comes to beer. I can be a very disciplined person. But I know many, many, many men who would utterly fail at being a Stoic, even in their civil life. And I don't think there's an answer here for now what.
Uh-huh.
Or why I don't even think Peterson does it more than most, but why should this matter so much for me to try so hard at? I look at other people in the world who seem like they don't lift a finger to do good for other people or even themselves half the time, and they seem to be much more successful than me. This doesn't have an answer to that. There's no answer to that question here. And so I think even civilly, there are some problems here. But you got to understand where, from Peterson's perspective, and I'd say honestly from mine, where we are, we're at the total other side of that. Like
Sure.
it's like when I get asked when I'm out doing a Being Dad gig, why don't I talk about being moms? And I'm like, if you want somebody, I use Rod's answer. If you want somebody to talk about being a mom, there's probably 10,000 people that can come and do that for you better than I can. There's hardly anybody talking about this, so I talk about this. And he's kind of saying the same thing, that there are countless examples out there of the failure of the young man, the failure in school, the failure in life, the failure in the workplace. And he sees this, and he connects the rise of the social justice movement to this. He connects sort of the
Gangs,
the rise of sort of focusing on only women's education in the schools and how boys are failing in school. All of that gets connected here, and he's trying to give these young men a sense of hope. And I commend him for that. And we need more of it, honestly. We need more of it. I just think we can have more of it that's connected to grace and forgiveness for when they fail. I mean, it's like we've said all the time on the show when we're talking about like being dad type of stuff or fatherhood or whatever. If you want your kids to know that they're part of the family and that they're loved forever, like love them forever as much as you can unconditionally. And the other things will come out of that more likely than you say, well, if you make your bed and you do the other 11 rules, then I'll love you.
You get some sort of conditional love, which, I mean, like the book says, that affects your whole view of the world.
Right. Or like
I've seen this with lots of people. I have friends like this where their view of the world is, what can I do to make the this authority figure love me or respect me. Like, what can I do to do that?
Right.
And eventually, and in some cases, there's never any sort of mutual respect ever earned
Well, it's like
or
the
attained.
email Rod and I got from Bob Kolb a couple of years ago when he was talking about something else, and he said the law, i.e., what Jordan Peterson is teaching all these men, will work in the short term to change behavior. But if you want a child to know that he's part of the family forever, it has to be the gospel.
Yep.
So I'd say the same thing here. Even if you're trying to teach the young men that you care about and that you love, to sort of fight against all this cultural war against them, start by teaching them that they're part of the family unconditionally and that you love them unconditionally, and then go to this is why as a family we act as a family, right? Why is it important for you to do your dishes on dish night? Because this is a family, right? And we all rely on each other in this family because we love each other. Not because you need to do the dishes to be loved in this family. The other way around.
Big difference.
We love each other, and as a family, we rely on each other for the mutual care of this home.
And if you don't think about it, it's I think very easy to mix those two things up to allow the I love you because you do the dishes or because you keep your room clean to replace the I love you, and that's why we keep our room clean and we do the dishes.
Mm-hmm. Big difference.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I ranted.
I feel like you have some opinion on this.
I know.
Subject.
Well, the other one that I was thinking of as you were talking, all the psych studies that show that if the father is honored and loved within the family by the children, how easy it is to become theists.
Oh yes, that's
It's just over and over
it's
and over and over.
It's so overwhelming. It ought to be talked about more or assumed more.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And the fact is, it's not assumed, so we need to talk about it more. But the secular data on that is overwhelming.
Yep.
I wanted to ask about that. What's the data?
Well, the data basically says that a child's view of their father or of God is a one-to-one view of their father. And it's multiple psychological studies, longitudinal, over years and years. I think some 50 to 60 years of data on this, not Christian, secular, that show that literally it's a one-to-one view. So if you ask a child, what's God like? What do you think God is like? And they said, oh, he's a real jerk. He's always out to get me. He's nothing I
He's
do.
never
is,
there when I need him.
Never there. Nothing I do is good enough for him.
Yep. Killjoy.
And then you ask, what's your dad like? And he goes, oh man, that guy, I can never win with that guy. First of all, he's never home. And when he is home, all he's doing is on my case. It's a one-to-one. Or said another way, what's your view of God? Well, he's just never there. What's your view of your dad? I don't know my dad. That's another one. Flip side of that, what's your view of God? I think he loves me. I think he cares for me. All this, and they say, what's your view of your dad? He does his best. I know he loves me. He tries really hard to be a good dad. And you're going to get that kind of one-to-one. And it's just over and over and over again.
It's been, how long has your book been out? 5 years?
Think 4.
So it's been a long time, so forgive me.
It's been a while.
Is that covered in your book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, not in as much detail. I
Are
got
there
more
footnotes to the...
Yes.
Okay.
I got more detail on that when I was out in Texas doing a Being Dad gig, and there was a professional psychologist from one of the bigger hospitals in Oregon that was speaking first. And then it was me, and I got really worried because I do have some data in there, and I'm like, I'm not a statistician. This isn't my field. And I'm like, oh, I really hope my data holds up.
Yeah.
And he started out by saying, the data in Dr. Keith's book is great, but it doesn't go far enough.
Really?
He's like, let me give you some more. And he just listed out 30, 30 studies. He gave a handout. There was 30 studies on this handout. Every one of these studies shows that a child's view of God is a direct correlation to their view of their father. Every single one of them.
And very anecdotally too, you see a lot of people who don't have fathers or have a very strained relationship with their father.
Yeah. Well, it's the big thing is if with the incidents of abuse and whatnot, it's virtually you never want to discount the power of the Holy Spirit to change somebody's heart, right? Because that's exactly what the scriptures promise how a person comes to faith. But we know it's very, very difficult for people, especially women who've been abused by their fathers,
Yep.
to become believers. In a Christian context, at least, where
Yep.
you have God, a good father who loves them enough to send another man, Jesus, their son, to die for them.
Yeah, how difficult it is to say the first few words of the Lord's Prayer.
Right. Or the creed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah. I believe in God the Father Almighty, that would love me enough that he's the maker of heaven and earth. You know, that's very hard.
Well, we're at time. Is there are there anything if people should read if they want to get introduced to this a little more thoroughly? Are there any books you would recommend on both sides, on both like sort of, classical Stoicism and this pop Stoicism?
Well, if you can get a hold of it, Neil Robinson's lectures on the history of Western philosophy, the title of the particular lecture on this is The Stoic Bridge to Christianity. And maybe you can get it on YouTube or something like that. But I don't. Every once in a while, the teaching company has these sales where you can get the whole,
Yes,
the whole thing is great. But
And Robinson is
he's
great.
really good.
Yep.
Jordan Peterson, of course, he's got, you should read him probably.
Well, 12 Rules
For life.
for Life is, well, let's give a couple warnings here. He's got two big books. First one's Maps of Meaning. It's
Good luck trying to get.
yeah,
through that thing.
it's huge, and it really is a Hegelian knot. I mean, it really is. 12 Rules for Life is shorter and is intended to be more, I'll say, lay level. I still think it's rather long, and there are parts of it that are still rather hard to understand, and I'm not uneducated, and there's parts of it that are still difficult to grasp. I've heard there's a short, like,
An abridged version?
abridged 100-page version of 12 Rules for Life. I think I'd probably recommend that.
I was thinking, am I wrong when my first mental connection is between Stoicism and Buddhism? Is that off the track?
I don't think so. No, it's very easy because it is monistic ultimately when it comes down to it. We're all just sort of part of this large order, and we're all sort of equal in.
Well, I'm thinking
metaphysical way.
that in Buddhism, part of it is to accept what's coming your way and not bitch about it.
Yeah. That would be like the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism,
Right.
That there's suffering. Suffering comes from attachment to
Anything.
circumstances, and Buddhism says you need to rise above that, and it gives the Eightfold Path.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
I mean, I think Buddhism has a much more Eastern character, and the content, the details are a little different, but I think if you will, this system, the trajectory is very similar. There is in classical Buddhism even a sort of reincarnation motif. They wouldn't call it that. What do they call it? The transmigration of the soul, and so there are a lot of parallels. That and Taoism.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thanks.
One more bibliographical reference. Paul Meyer, in his, is it In the Fullness of Time or Paul's Journeys? One of these books / lecture series goes over Paul's encounter with the Stoics. He's the first one I heard say that Paul is especially interested in going after the Stoics because he thinks there are a lot. It's sort of like Augustine on Plato. Plato got us as far as human knowledge can get you. According to Paul Meyer, Paul sees the Stoics getting you as far as you can go, but that's about
Yeah, there's some
ultimately
stuff
stop,
about
so.
Paul adapting their language to speak to Gentiles and
Yeah, and Paul probably, this is another reference to Paul Meyer, St. Paul he certainly was around Seneca, one of these great Stoic teachers. He was the advisor to Nero. I think Nero eventually had him killed, but he was a hardcore Stoic. And when Paul's put in a Roman prison, Seneca was put in a Roman prison. So there's a good chance those guys
hung out.
hashed it out. I'm not going to suggest there's a deathbed
Right.
conversion or anything like that. But
Right.
I can do like
If I could be a fly on
like
the
then
wall.
sometimes accused and baptizing the ancients into Christianity.
Oh wow! Well, great guys. Thanks for this fun conversation. This was definitely a new topic for us. So we haven't done a lot of philosophy that wasn't directly related to apologetics. So this was fun. All right. Thank you for listening to this episode. We'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. If you haven't already, please go subscribe to the show. That's how you can get the show every week without missing it. And you can find us on social media. New episodes pop up there, so you'll get alerted. You can find us on Thinky Fellows on Twitter and on Facebook. So we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye.